the public scandal.
Edward Taylor and Anne Bradstreet were two widely hailed poets of colonial America. Though their works were written privately for their own leisure, later on they became very famous. Neither of them sought glory or recognition. They mainly wrote about subject matter that was close to their hearts, and through it all ran the thoughts of God. At the age of 24, Edward Taylor made the Atlantic leap to settle in Massachusetts Bay Colony, bringing with him a formidable intellect and, perhaps most importantly, a passion for God's mystery. He was in awe of the world and the sacraments, and saw in the Holy Communion the draught of the Gospels distilled. This love and wonder manifested itself in a series of meditations, written in poetic form, which came to form the narrative God's Determinations, nowadays regarded as one of the masterworks of America.
When I first discovered Edward Taylor's work at the Yale University, it was one of a kind and incredible. I was completely moved by what he had to say. Taylor's poems established him as almost at once, and without quibble, as not only America's finest Puritan poet, but as one of the most striking writers in the whole range of American literature.
Though Taylor's life revolved around the invisible, it didn't follow that he was not involved in the welfare of the city. When Westfield, Massachusetts was threatened by Indian raids, Taylor assisted in preparing the town's defenses. He served as teacher, minister, and physician, a doctor to ailments both physical and spiritual. Taylor had a fondness for metaphor, which he used to great effect in his poetry. A good example of this is Upon a Spider Catching a Fly, in which the extended metaphor of a spider and a fly is used to contemplate the predatory, cyclical nature of temptation. The poem also displays several other hallmarks of Taylor's style. His commitment to traditional form, coupled with a wholly original commitment to meaning. Taylor weaves a web of metaphor and form. I would describe my grandfather as a classical scholar, a master of 3 ancient languages and an able historian. A man of small stature, but firm, of quick passions, yet serious and grave. I inherited his library and carried out his wish that none of his poems should enter into publication. And I was adamant that all of his poetry be stored at Yale University, of which I was privileged. Another one of Taylor's most famous poems is a moving elegy he wrote in the memory of his first wife. She died after 15 years of marriage, leaving him with 8 children.
My husband was a very loving man. Most of his poems were about God, and he was extremely religious. You see, our family believed that God was the highest and most supreme power. More importantly, however, my husband didn't want his poems to be published because he didn't want the public to see his private life. He felt like his poems were personal and a connection that he had with God.
Taylor eventually remarried and had 6 more children. He died in 1729, a staunch servant to God and people. Another very important Puritan poet was Anne Bradstreet. She and her family crossed the Atlantic during the Great Migration, settling in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, for which her father, Thomas Dudley, and husband, Simon Bradstreet, both served as governors. Her education allowed her to write many poems. She modeled her earliest work after traditional forms and the poetry of her male peers. She later branched out and started to write poems that were closer to the bone, exploring personal emotions. She wrote frequently during the lonely time she spent without her husband, who often left on business affairs.
Anne and I got married when she was 16 and I was around 24. I love my wife very dearly, but it was very hard for me to spend quality time with her, for I was usually away on important trips. It was extremely difficult for me when she passed away in 1672. We had 8 children together, but unfortunately, only 7 survived through infancy. After Anne passed away, I married Anne Gardner, the widow of Captain Joseph Gardner.
Anne had 8 children whom she frequently homeschooled.
Our mother was very kind to us. She taught us everything from etiquette to reading and writing. She was always our role model, and all of us looked up to her. Our life in the Bay Colony was extremely difficult,
and once in a while, I could see the hardships my mother was going through. I think that writing poems was a way for her to let out her feelings.
The poem Upon the Burning of Our House, July 1666, was inspired by the actual events of her house burning. She had written more than 800 poems previously, all of which were destroyed in the fire. Her poetry inhabited the nexus of the domestic, the feminine, and the spiritual. She was concerned with the segregation of women during the Puritan ages. Her first poem was published without her knowledge in England. And she was a caring, well-mannered woman. When I first read one of her poems, I was surprised by the depth of it. I was eager to show the people of England how a religious and educated woman such as Anne could maintain her stature as a mother and wife and write poetry. That's why I took one of her manuscripts and sailed to England with it to publish her first poem. A literate, faithful woman, Anne Bradstreet died in Andover, Massachusetts on September 16, 1972.
Watching us.
Your hair's like your hair. Put your right leg down on that. No, don't like try to get up so you're like yeah.
Oh my goodness. Go around.
And then just scoot that way.
I'm back where I started.
The native is in her element, slowly stalking the unsuspecting pilgrim.
How is this?